I would love to think that I am in my studio and I've got the greatest sound. I'll get real close. And I never know where to look. I think I'm supposed to be looking up there. So not the greatest sound this morning. You might even hear the computer fire up. Got a client in 12 minutes. So in the spirit of consistency, I've been up since 5, but in the spirit, I don't know why I felt the need to tell you that. In the spirit of consistency, I wanted to do one this morning, even though it's not going to be nearly as long. Okay. Okay, you have your little notebook. Okay, I want you to grab your notebook and just do a brain dump before we get into who is going to call me, text me, or send me a voice memo on how to say this gentleman's name correctly? Because I Googled it and I can't even get it. It's Nich At Han. We're going to go with that. Okay, so there was one person watching and then they went away. I love that. Okay, so today's date is the 9th, July 9th. It's also my sister's birthday. So if you are Sarah, if you're watching this, happy birthday. If you're not, and you know my sister, randomly sent her a happy birthday text. She won't answer the phone, so you have to text to it. Okay, brain dump. What are you thinking about? What's off the top of your head? Okay, so there's where we've gotten our, even just keywords, something like that on paper. So now we can focus. We don't have to think about anything else. And I'm going to read another passage from No Death, No Fear. Okay, now our next one is finding a lost loved one. Okay. The same thing happens when we lose any of our beloved ones. When conditions are not right to support life, they withdraw. When I lost my mother, I suffered a lot. When we are only 7 or 8 years old, it is difficult to think that one day we will lose our mother. Eventually, we grow up and we lose our mothers. But if you know how to practice, then when the time comes for the separation, you will not suffer too much. You will very quickly realize that your mother is always alive within you. The day my mother died, I wrote in my journal, a serious misfortune of my life has arrived. I suffered for more than a year after the passing of my mother. But one night in the highlands of Vietnam, I was sleeping in a hut in my hermitage. I dreamed of my mother. I saw myself sitting with her, and we were having a wonderful talk. She looked young and beautiful, her hair flowing down. It was so pleasant to sit there and talk with her as if she'd never died. When I woke up, it was about 2 a.m, and I felt very strong that I had never lost my mother. The impression that my mother was still with me was very clear. I understood then that the idea of having lost my mother was just an idea. It was obvious in that moment that my mother is always alive in me. I opened the door, went outside. The entire hillside was bathed in moonlight. It was a hill covered with tea plants, and my hut was set behind a temple halfway up. Walking slowly in the moonlight through the rows of tea plants, I noticed my mother was still with me. She was the moonlight, caressing me as she had done so often. Very tender, very sweet, wonderful. Each time my feet touched the earth, I knew my mother was there with me. I knew this body was not mine alone, but a living continuation of my mother and my father and my grandparents and great grandparents. Of all my ancestors, these feet that I saw as my feet were actually our feet. Together, my mother and I were leaving footprints in the damp soil. From that moment on, the idea I had lost my mother no longer existed. All I had to do was look at the palm of my hand, feel the breeze on my face, or the earth under my feet to remember that my mother is always with me, available at any time. When you lose a loved one, you suffer. But if you know how to look deeply, you have a chance to realize that his or her or they nature is truly the nature of no birth, no death. There is a manifestation, that there is the sensation of manifestation. In order to have another manifestation, you have to be very keen, very alert, in order to recognize the new manifestations of just one person. But with the practice and with effort, you can do it. So taking the hand, one more paragraph. So taking the hand of someone you know, the practice, together do walking meditation. Pay attention to the leaves, the flowers, the birds, and the dewdrops. If you can stop and look deeply, you will be able to recognize your beloved one manifesting again and again in many forms. You will again embrace the joy of life. All right, so let's just take a second and write. All right. That was a lot. My takeaway is definitely not arbitrary to needing to like imagine that this has happened. My father killed himself when I was 21 years old. And, it has been a long road of therapy and self reflection and doing it wrong with my kids and all kinds of stuff. But I wrote down that I'm like, this dude's not telling me, right, that I'm not supposed to mourn and have a period of, whatever, of the anger and the grief and this trying to bargain and those stages of grief. But I'm wondering if it goes even further. If I practice, then maybe I don't have to go through the stages of grief. Maybe it's almost self-indulgent to think that there's an end, like yesterday's, where it's like the annihilation If someone is teaching 2 classes today, that's a lot. That it needs to be the annihilation of the relationship, the idea that it needs to be done, put it in a box. Because I know that's what I did for years with Dad. So what I ended up writing about was with practice, right? And with practice means the death of a lot of things that I think die. Relationships. I think that a lot of people talk about old self and new self, and like, oh, that's just my old behavior coming back up. And I'm like, I've always felt a little weird about that. Is it really old behavior? Is it really your old self? Did it really die? Or I'm not a huge fan of the word manifestation because I feel like it's been kind of retailed out. But there's a certain amount of energy there that transfers. It doesn't go anywhere. Energy doesn't just disappear. So my client's here. So try to breathe. Maybe sit still for a little bit. I'll see you guys tomorrow.